Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Crime Centric. This being a show it's about crime dramas that I watch. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about episode 11 of Leverage Redemption. Another great episode. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. I really like the nature of the story, because at first I didn't expect the story to develop where it was when we got introduced to Stella. Obviously, she's someone older being stolen from, because basically this guy is basically been seen like by the court as her guardian, Phil, but he's a douchebag, stealing all her stuff, even trying to like sell her house from underneath her. And just by happenstance, Brianna as well as Sophie crossed paths with Stella, because Brianna like basically needed to go through like because she basically tried to steal the watch of like a councilman's brother or something, and it's like she's like, ain't like you guys haven't stole before. It's like, yeah, but we've never gotten caught. I mean, you've gotten caught technically, but never in a legal sense. It's just like, yeah, it's just like you got mixed up with some people kind of blackmailing you, and you've been in complicated situations, but the caught is with quotes around it. But yeah, it's immediately Sophie notices that Stella stole Brianna's like phone out of her pack. It's like, oh, she's crafty, which you immediately my brain's thinking of like Archie, Parker's dad. And so the moment like Sophie's like, honestly, I saw what you did, and it's just like, oh, like she's playing like the frail old lady, but it's like, no, like she's like, you're an actress, like, I'm one too. And then she starts noticing little things like, oh, the ring and this and that. You're the Jackal, the greatest grift that ever lived. And so the moment the story starts, I was like, are we going to get like a combination of like, there's the episode with Danny Glover where he played a soldier named, well, he's older now, but like, he was a soldier in the army. He was Charlie, but basically the whole story was about a painting, him coming back to the town where he fell in love. And also the episode in the final season about D.B. Cooper around, there's the FBI agent that, had a thing for Parker, his dad, like that was just the one case, like that was a whole thing. So like it reminded me of that, where those were kind of flashback episodes, and it definitely reminded me of that. And I thought this episode was kind of a combination of all that, and I really love those episodes because they're really neat episodes in that regard. It definitely leans more, in my opinion, it leans a little more towards it's still applicable to both, but I feel like it's definitely like the Danny Glover episode. It definitely feels like it leans a little more in that direction, but both episodes are applicable to the circumstances, because I was excited about, because that means they're probably going to like have flashbacks to kind of show like a younger Jackal in its particular storyline. Because the sad thing is, it turns out she has Alzheimer's, and because for Sophie, it's like this is our hero. She's like, I looked up to her, and it's not just her, like everyone in the crib with the exception of Harry, because Harry's not that well versed in everything, because obviously Brianna doesn't know her younger generation and all that, but they all know all that the Jackal has accomplished. Like, she's a world-renowned thief. And so for, a grifter where their mind is their everything, to have that kind of taken from you, I mean, it's not just in her case, like Alzheimer's, even dementia, like it's all like a heartbreaking thing, like having your memory stolen from you. It's like in your older life, you should be able to look back on like the good, the good in your life, and to have that all kind of taken from you, losing a little bit of who you are, and not just that, losing the people you love because you can't remember them as well. It's like, that's heartbreaking. But especially because I think when Sophie looks at her, I'm sure she sees a little bit of herself in that, and it's like, it's just like, all you can like hope is like, I hope like I'm able to look back on all my greatest cons when I'm her age, of like, I might have I have my own resume, but obviously I'm no Jackal, but I thought that's so, but I thought it was a really lovely story, love and tragedy, like all mixed into one. And why, like, Brianna, like, immediately, like, I felt like this was going to be Brianna's story in particular, because she connected with Stella, because it turns out, because you could tell immediately, like, Stella's like, because at first I was like, oh, is she playing, like, pretending, but it's like, no, it became obvious. Like, it's like, no, especially because later on when she walked away and she came back, she's like, oh, it was a test. And then she's like, it's like, oh, my power of attorney, it's with my greatest treasure. It's like, oh, where is that? And she's like, yeah, I can't just tell you what. It's like, the moment she's in it, it's like, because she doesn't remember. And she even eventually, like, in the next second or two, like, ends up, being like, yeah, I can't remember. So, but Brianna and her connects, because Brianna's like, before I went to live with Nana, like, the courts like sent me to live with my grandma, but her grandma like had dementia. So, because even Sophie was saying like, Nate, at least it was quick. This, it's like, it's a slow thing, and along the way, you're losing pieces of yourself as well as pieces to the people that matter to you. So it's even more heartbreaking when it comes to losing things. And so, but it definitely reminded me when it came to the Charlie storyline, how he had Parker sit back because he saw like what was going on between Parker and Hardison, and it reminded him of his love, So I thought it was kind of beautiful, like the symbolism of like Brianna in this particular case being the one that kind of is able to help Stella through everything as they're like reliving her story. There was like a gangster named Earl, and I figured as much the moment like she's like, oh, I want a cup of Joe, and I'm like, okay, so Joe's the person. And then the moment they focused on the person like cleaning the table as the scene was transition, I'm like, she's Joe. I figured as much. And so, especially because Earl was kind of giving her these looks of like, oh, you're like right here beside your wife, Josephine, and you're like that, But especially when you hear Josephine's name, you're like, Josephine, Joe. It's like, yeah, that's the person you fell in love with. You fell in love with a mobster's wife. That takes balls, to do that. It could basically steal a mobster's wife from him like that. That's amazing. But initially because basically he had like a whole bunch of gold bars, and so. No, it wasn't bars. It was coins. And so, because I love that Brianna was like, why didn't you just like steal the coins or whatever? She was like, go out of there with like that many coins. Like, plus like, she's like, I'm not good with the combination stuff. Like, that's where this team lucks out because they all have their strengths and stuff like that and fill in where the others are weakest. So like Parker, safe combinations and stuff. That's her thing. Granted, like Hardison and like Brianna can like fill that gap a little bit especially if it's something electronic, but even analog, Parker's got that down. But like the team, like a lot of them kind of shift and shape, like because a lot of them, like Parker in particular, has gained a little bit of everything. She can be the mastermind. She can be the grifter. She can be the thief as well. And she can play the role of a hitter if she needs to. Probably the only one area that's probably still like her weakest would probably be like the hacker. But, those other aspects, like she's kind of like, and I think that just showcases just how awesome Parker is. The fact is that she, like, because like I said, everyone else is kind of acquired. Like even Elliot's kind of dabbled in the grifter standpoints and stuff like that. Everyone kind of has. So, but obviously Sophie's still always going to be top class amongst all of them. The point was that Stella couldn't just get the coins whenever she wanted to. In fact, she had to work at that bar for like several weeks, with even Sophie being like, wow, several weeks? That's crazy. Just because it's like, usually I think Sophie kind of works on jobs that are, I guess a job of this nature, it's kind of like usually you don't stick around for that long period of time. Because I'm about to say, I'm sure like Sophie's like, but her job's probably run a little quickly. There's probably never like really extensive long jobs are like, oh, this went for months. It's like, no, it's probably like maybe at most a couple days, maybe a week. It's never like several weeks that like they go into putting into a job. Because even over in the course of like cons that they pull in like the show, it probably at most is a week dedicated because like there's the prep for it, but the actual pulling off the con and the job itself usually is probably like a couple days at most. So it's the prep work, but the con job itself, it's never that like long. At least in the context of the show, it usually isn't, unless they're building up to like a Damian Monroe type of situation. Obviously there's exceptions like that, but yeah, like getting to hear Stella's story of just where it started at the beginning of like, right, it was just meant to be a means of getting close to her, but eventually it's like, right, like Earl is also like clingy to other women. That's why I thought he was going to make a move on Stella, but Stella probably like saw through him and like who he was, especially because later on she starts seeing bruises on Joe, and it's like he was an abusive bastard. He's not only like trying to step out on her like with other, but it's like whatever, like he just being an abusive prick would hit her, and she tries to play it off like, oh no, like I fell, especially because that's what because Stella could see him for what he was, because in her mind it's like, right, like yeah, he might be this way and that, but like when we're together he is kind of sweet, like yeah, this is kind of a front because like the cops would need a warrant here to get to anything related to Earl, but at the very least he also lets me run this place however I want to. Sadly, that's just a consolation prize to like having to deal with his BS. And so, but over the course of it, the time they spent together, because even Stella was like, she's not used to opening up to people. The fact is that that it's like she doesn't really have many friends. And it's like, you know, because usually for her, she feels like if people are getting close to you, they want something. And even asking, you know, Joe is like, do you want something from me? She's like, yeah, I want a friend, because she doesn't, you know, it's like all she has is Earl's buddies and their wives and their mistresses and stuff like that. It's like that's all she has. But like having a true blue friend like Joe, like Stella, like that's something rare. But it didn't stop with just friendship. It grew into so much more, and they eventually fell in love. But then things went sideways with the job, and Joe wants the job went sideways, and Earl wanted Joe with him, and she was like, and the reason why she got hurt is because he hit her, because she said like, no, I want to stay here with you. And so she gave Stella the combination. It's like, let's get out of here. And so Stella was going to get the gold bars, but she decided not to. She took the gun, which we find out is kind of one of her prized possessions, but like it's a very interesting gun, and I love that Elliot knows all about it. Even like Sophie's looking at him like, he's like, what? I don't like guns. That doesn't mean I don't know all there is to know about, because it's a very special gun that was like faceted for, was it was one of the Roosevelts. Was it Theodore Roosevelt? Was it might have been Franklin Roosevelt. I don't remember. It's one of the Roosevelts. It was like forged for. But so this gun is what she stole, and she bounced, because her main thing was like, right, if she stole anything from him, like it would give Earl extra ammunition to come after them, but also it would make Joe find out that she's a thief. But she didn't want that, because for her it's like, if it ever came to light what she really was, she's like, it would ruin everything between us, so she didn't want to take that chance. So it's like, right, we'll just kind of run. And they found the way to New Orleans, because it's one of the few places they could just be themselves. They were a little freer, but there were still restrictions on them being together, you know, that ended up still being an issue. But they had a daughter together, because, you know, Earl, like she was pregnant with Earl, but obviously it's like, no, that's not Earl's kid. That's Joe and Stella's daughter, you know? And so they were happy, you know, and they became each other's power of attorney. But because they signed those papers, Earl was able to find her, because Joe used her real name on the papers. So I guess he was using every contact and connection he could. He's been probably looking for him from those past years, because it turns out like he's been looking, at the very least at that point, it was like 8 years or so he was looking for them. So, because initially she didn't want to tell the story fully, especially when it got to the point in the story where Earl had found them, and she wanted to stop the story, you know, and Sophie kept trying to push her, but it's like, yeah, we're trying to help you, but it's like, even Harry's like, yeah, it's not the easiest thing, kind of reliving some bad memories, because yeah, there was a lot of good, but there's also like, there were so many tragedies, and so much was kind of lost because of it. So, but because of what turns out is like, they end up finding out because of Harry that basically Phil is working with a corrupt judge. That basically this judge, with all the wards that Phil, because what he's doing to Stella, he's done to every ward under his position. So he would basically shift them off to like lower, cheaper, like nursing homes, and then like rob them blind essentially. And so this judge will basically get his cut into it. So to kind of get involved in all this, to get Phil kind of like, so they can find out where Phil stashed his stuff. I love that. Like, you know, you got Parker acting a little crazy and stuff like that, losing her mind. And I love that. Just like, yeah, but it's Parker, so it adds an extra layer, because like she can never go like 50%, she's got to give it 100 and 110%, so she has to go off the wall of bonkers. And so yeah, they get Phil's attention by like, oh yeah, like Parker's supposed to be this rich and she's got all this stuff. And I love the moment Harry's like, oh, I have a table just like that. I was like, I had to pause it, because that is your stuff, isn't it, Harry? He's like, oh, I got that lamp and that chair. Wait, is this my stuff? They're like, yeah, we need something like boring like you. He's like, this isn't boring. But yeah, I even love, what was that line from Parker where she was inside the box and she was like, ooh, a box. It's like a movable vent. And it's like, I love that vents are so like your thing. You're like, ah. And then like, I love that she was talking to Ellie. He's like, oh, you think Hardison would put me in a box for my birthday? He's like, I don't want to hear that. Either just because it's a weird thing of like asking your boyfriend to stuff you in a box is weird. Two, it could almost be seen as a sexual thing, which is weird in its own right. So I'm sure it's a combination of the two. But it's like, oh, look at all this stuff. It's like, no, like, look at all the people, because every item in there was like someone that Phil had ripped off and stolen from. So, but the ultimate thing was like, they had to put Phil in a position where, because he hoards stuff that's not just like, he doesn't share everything with the judge. He'll keep stuff for himself. Like he stole a watch, which was Harry's watch. But it, which I love Elliot being like, why didn't you think of that like 6 hours ago before we were rummaging through that place trying to find the pistol? So he's trying to sell it on his own, and he takes the more fancier stuff because he doesn't know how valuable it is. So they set the whole thing up to get, it's like, right, let's do a con with, well, because initially they're like doing like, oh, let's do like a job with the Jackal herself. And so they get him like confessing about the pistol and stuff like that in front of the judge who wants his cut of it. So that's all set in motion. But obviously, like, oh, it's like, yeah, here's our digs. And even Stella being like, wow, like back in my day, we didn't have many, we're very limited in what we do. I even love Parker try to flex. She's like, yeah, I've gone up against a Strenko. And Stella's like, that's good for you, dear. I was like, no. It's like, oh, Parker's almost like, okay. It's like, it's such a shame because it's like, no, that's a big deal. Like, Parker dealt with a Strenko not once, twice. They had it advanced to Strenko because of how good she was at like dealing with it. Because I brought it up earlier, the Archie situation, like that was the first time they'd ever gone toe to toe with a Strenko. I'm saying it wrong. But it's like, yeah, it's like that's a big accomplishment in Parker's career, having gone toe to toe with one of those. Not once, but like I said, an advanced version because of the leverage team. They had to amp that thing up, and they beat it a second time too. So. But actually, Sophie was able to get her to open up a little bit more about her circumstances, about what happened with Joe the night Earl found them. And basically, he was like, after his money, I was like, what money? Joe didn't take, not Joe, but Stella didn't take the gold. I was like, what money is he talking about? Is he lying? It's like, I know about the pistol. Yeah, he wants that, but the money. And it's like, yeah. And he confesses everything in front of Joe because he's like, yeah, like I did a little background and it turns out your girlfriend's a proper thief. So, and it's like, yeah, give me my money or I'm going to take my daughter because of course the court's going to side with me, especially at that time. And obviously for Joe, it's like, why didn't you just tell me? She was like, because I thought you'd hate me, And it's like, well, was there anything between us real? And it's like, for her, it's like, do you know how you can tell if a diamond's fake? If you can, like, heat it and it cracks, it's a fake. And it's like, you and me, we've been in some heated situations, but we never broke. So that in itself is proof enough, And so she sends Joe away with their daughter because it's like, right, I'll figure it out. I'll get rid of Earl and I'll come find you guys. I was like, is that why you... But then it's like, thanks with Earl turned sideways because we finally get the answer. They don't have the coins. Because the coin is like, no, the coins were never in the safe. And of course, like, Stella would never know that because she never actually cracked the safe open. She just assumed they were there. But in fact, they were actually in the car, the Merc. And it's like, we dumped that like 8 years ago because it was the last tie between us and you. And obviously him being the aggro bastard he is, he tries to kill her. She said that she shot him. And because of that, she ended up, never going near Joe or their daughter anyway because they didn't want to like add more to them. So... What was interesting, too, it's like Sophie did ask, like, oh, how'd you get rid of the body? And she was like, I can't remember. Now we get context to that later on. Because initially, like, they're setting up this whole plan to go after, to get them, like, cameras and stuff like that in there so they could get the cops to arrest them and, eventually get the gun and the power of attorney because they're pretty sure that's where the power of attorney is with the gun. And the guy they're selling to, Jean-Pierre, was willing to help. And it's like, he's like, oh, why would I do that? And it's like, she's like, because I'm Parker and I owe you a favor. And he's like, well, you're the Parker? And it's like, I love that. It's like, yeah, they've all got their reputations because it's like, oh my God, you're Sophie Devereaux. But it's like, I feel like out of anyone in that group, well, because like, Hardison's kind of got his own reputation, but I feel like probably Elliot and Parker probably have the biggest reputations on anyone in that. I don't know, because Sophie's got a pretty big reputation. I feel like amongst, like, those are your three hitters, like your three top dogs of that group, obviously. But I'm like, I want to say, I don't know. Parker and Elliot might be tied for like most recognition, but maybe Sophie is too. But I feel like Elliot's like, he's going up against some, like, really bad people. We're talking warlords and stuff, so he might have the edge with infamy amongst, like, some very bad people, but Parker's well known around the world. Because even, like, during that episode, because I referenced it last episode, was the episode where it's, like, the girls' night out, it's her, Tara, and Sophie. It's, like, that guy, when he found out, wait, you're the Parker? Because it's, like, everyone knows Parker. But, yeah, because of that, like, they were, and I love the good old switcheroo, the sleight of hands of, like, right, they dumped the real gun into Stella's umbrella, and then Sophie had a fake one in her bag. I was like, oh, I love that. And they ended up getting arrested. And even Jean-Pierre came out being like, yeah, there was no papers, and he felt bad for letting them. And I was like, oh, he's got a heart to go. I guess it's also like, right, I promised a favor to the Parker, so, like, I feel like I'm letting you all down. But I think he probably knew the context of what was going on and what this meant, because he probably all knew, so, like, oh, this is the Jackal too, so that didn't come up, but, you know, her reputation probably precedes her in that regard. But for her, it's like, despite not being with Joe, she lived her own life, and that was something she had talked with Sophie about, because Sophie was like, with everything they ended with, the way it did with Earl, like, did you ever regret, like, running off with Joe? And she's like, I get it, you lost someone, but it's not about the length of the relationship, it's about the depth of it. And it's like, yeah, like, I had a whole bunch of adventures, but it's also a thing of, like, I would never take back, like, you know, even when you lost someone, it's like, it's easy to get wrapped in the moments of the bad stuff. I know that. I've talked about it time and time again. I've personally been in a situation where I've looked back on relationships negatively because all I ever focused on was, like, the bad stuff. Like, I didn't focus on, like, one of my particular relationships. I didn't focus on the fact is, for the first time in my life, I fell madly in love with a girl. I was a teenager, and it's like, yeah, it might be puppy love, but I'd never felt that way about another person before in my entire life, and I will cherish that. I'm like, yeah, that's the first time I can honestly say, like, I was head over heels for a girl, and I'll always kind of cherish that now. But, you know, a long time, like, I kind of didn't, like, look at that relationship that way, but now I've gained appreciation and everything, and it's like, you know, I'll hold on to that and cherish that. So it's kind of that same thing. It's like, yeah, that relationship for me only lasted 2 years, but there was a lot I learned and gained from that relationship, and like, I can look back on it, yeah, recognizing the bad and the fault I played in the relationship, like, ending the way it did, and just our even friendship dissolving the way it did after our relationship was over. Like, yeah, but I do look back and be like, yeah, it's still worth it or not, because it meant a lot to me at the time for someone who had never been, like, that in love with someone before. Like, it was nice, you know. Regardless, aside from my own, like, blah blah blah, you know, it's just like my own, like, oh, the gushy love story or whatever, like, putting my own personal story aside in that regard. I don't know. But to get the truth from Stella at the end, where it's like, the reason why she was like, oh, I can't remember about I guess it's because it turns out she wasn't the one that shot Earl. It was actually Joe, because Joe loved her so much she came back to make sure she was okay. And it's like, Earl was my burden to carry, not Joe's. So that's why, like, she got rid of everything, and she made sure, like, that's why she kept the gun. Mainly not as, like, oh, I'm gonna sell it, or, you know, it just as, oh, like, you know, my greatest. It's like, no, it was just in case the cops ever came looking, she would take the fall for it, because it's like, yeah, this is a murder weapon. It was me that fired it, you know, so it would never fall back on Joe. But ultimately, they found her power of attorney in what was actually her greatest treasure, and that was the painting Joe had did of her. And I was like, that's so beautiful and so sweet. And which also reminds me, like, even Sophie-wise, there was the, I want to say it was in the final season, maybe that might have been season 4. I want to say that was in the final season. I can't remember. The one about, like, the painting, because they also ran into, like, Sterling during this particular job, where it seemed like Sophie might be a potential suspect, and Nate's doing everything he can to make it. It's like, no, pulling her off the suspect. Like, that job, like I said, I want to say that was the final season, but I could be mistaken. Like, a lot of that, like, even during my rewatch, a lot of that's kind of blurred now together, but it kind of reminded me of that with just, like, the painting and stuff like that. But like I said, also, like, to the Charlie, it wasn't a painting of that. It was like a painting he had found from the Nazis during World War II. But like I said, the parallels. But ultimately, they were able to track down Joe and their daughter, and it's like, because her daughter is going to be her new power of attorney. Because she's like, yeah, eventually I'll have to go to a home anyway, even if you find me a new guardian. But it's like, no, like, she was reunited with her family. She was worried, like, so much time and stuff. But, like, for Sophie, it's like, right, my greatest treasure was Nate. My greatest score was Nate. And if I could get one more day with him, I'd give anything for it. So your family's right here in front of you. And like the moment they meet, they're hugging and it's like they're all reunited. And even, Sophie's like, yeah, I wonder what my next adventure is going to look like. Which even, I'll go ahead and put it out there. Part of me kept thinking like, are they going to set up a... I don't see them doing it. It could happen, but I don't know. Like the whole Sophie and Harry thing, I feel like that might be a thing, but it's probably not. Because I'm curious, is Harry going to fix his relationship with his ex? I mean, to be fair, like there's the whole Maggie and Nate thing. So it's like, but that's led to like Sophie and Nate. But it's like, and even like Maggie was like happy about there being like something between them. But I'm curious in the long run though, like is that potentially what they're setting up? Just kind of like, oh, let's go for a cup of Joe. And they tend to be like the ones that kind of get like paired up together a lot through a lot of this. So in totality, like I said, there was some bumpy roads. The tragedy of it is like, it's like they spent so much time away from it. Yeah, she had her own adventures, but it's sad that she couldn't be with them just because she didn't want to feel like a burden to them. But I'm like, at the end of it, though, it's still a beautiful, happy ending that despite everything, she is reunited with her family, and I think that's what matters most. So it's a beautiful, just a great episode. It's just like, it warms your heart, so... I thought that was great. I'm really excited to see where the next episode ends up taking us with all of this. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Until the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, light to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.